Okay, so you're all very welcome. Thanks a million to everybody who's joined us live today. Brilliant to have you live. I like it's lovely to see faces when I'm speaking, so I'll not just talk to myself or the little dot on the screen. And to anybody who's watching this on replay, thank you for taking the time as well. And for all of you, feel free to get in touch if there are questions that remain unanswered at the end of this. Always happy to meet with people or jump on a Zoom call. So today we're looking at the whole concept really of people issues and what you need to know. Many of you are leaders within organizations. We all work with people one way or another, and most of the time, somebody hopping in. Most of the time, the stress that we struggle with, or the reasons that people come to coaching often, is got to do with other people and difficult relationships, or difficulties within a relationship. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. For those of you who are maybe meeting me for the first time, my background is that I'm a chartered counselling psychologist. So I was a therapist for 20 years. I had a private practice in South Dublin. I closed that down in 2019 and have been working in coaching since, primarily with leaders, and I ran a lot of groups over the COVID years with women in leadership, specifically. But within organizations, I work with men and women, and kind of have opened that out again. So I've worked with a lot of different organizations over the years, since about 2004. So that's 20 years now in that, with organizations alongside the one-to-one work. And so currently I offer one-to-one coaching for leaders and generally senior leaders. But I'm also offering EMC, which I'm the first to be certified in Ireland and in Europe, in fact. So I will explain that as we go along, because it offers a new approach really to the whole area of working with people. So it's a funny one because, people have worked with people since time began, but there's still pretty much anybody I talk to has struggles and difficulties and people issues going on, and it takes a huge amount of effort for people and time. So if we look at some of the stats that are out there, about 85% at all levels, sorry, still people arriving, so just kind of jumping in and out to let them in. About 85% at all levels experience some degree of conflict in the workplace. And about 36% of employees spend a significant amount of time managing disputes. So almost everybody you talk to is experiencing some kind of conflict, whether that's happening over there or whether they're in it themselves. They're observing it or experiencing it. And about 1 in 4 have reported avoidance of conflict resulted in sickness or absence from work. So if you're looking at your absenteeism in the team, you can guess that about 25% of that is going to be to do with somebody is avoiding a difficult relationship or the fallout from that. And of course, when things get really bad, people are often so stressed with the difficult relationship that they are genuinely sick, and it's stress leave that you're looking at. So it's a huge issue. And even though we're using the word conflict, a lot of the time it's maybe not what we would call outright conflict. It's often quite, implicit rather than explicit conflict. It's kind of under the table stuff. There's people like pushing buttons or saying something snidely, knowing that that's going to hit the mark for somebody. It's comments, it's exclusion, it's preferential treatment, where somebody gets the nice jobs and somebody else is being landed with it all the time. So there are all these kind of game playing kind of strategies that are going on that we don't necessarily think of as outright conflict, but it is a breakdown in the relationship. It is a relationship difficulty. Okay. So some of the costs of conflict in the workplace, when we look at the bottom line, it's estimated that conflict uses up or wastes about 3 hours per week per employee. So if you've got 10 people on your team, that's 30 hours of your team time every week going on conflict. That's massive. And that's only a small team of 10. If you've got 100 people, that's like 300 hours a week. So that's massive when you look at the price of that. You multiply that out by the average salary in your organization, and you can start to look at the financial cost of conflict is huge. And that's at just 3 hours a week per person. That's probably quite a low estimate. Others have, like I've seen other research where they're estimating it's a couple of hours a day. That it's that significant, and of course it does depend on the culture, but even with great cultures, there's still people issues happening. So it has a massive cost at a lot of different levels because, even where there's the loss of hours, there's the loss of productivity. We're going to look a little bit at that. There's the absenteeism, and then when things get really bad and it's gone to HR, it's gone to employment law, it's gone to potentially mediation, and of course there's all those kind of legal fees and so on that bring in costs there as well, and it's very difficult for everybody involved. And very often, I suppose the approach is we're trying to manage a person out of an organization, because very often a person is identified as, well, that's the problem. If we can just get rid of them, then we won't have conflict issues. But you often get rid of the person, and there's still issues there. There are still issues there. So it's not as simple as that. So another, I think, really relevant piece here is that about that 75, and this is from Harvard Business Review, 75%, and this stat has probably been pretty stable for many years. 75% of survey participants said that the most stressful aspect of their job was the relationship with their immediate boss. So we know that about that number, like about 75%, leave their job because of the relationship with their boss. It's not the job, it's the relationship. And that's the message that I really want to get across today. It's, people will stay in a job that isn't great or doesn't even pay well if they have good relationships, if they feel safe and they feel valued and they're getting on well, they will often stay a long time in a job. But it doesn't matter how good the job is or how good the pay is. If it's a difficult relationship, particularly with their immediate boss, they're not going to last long. They'll be out of there. So it's a massive factor in turnover, and then of course even when somebody stays in the job, it's a massive factor actually in productivity and performance as well. So the root cause of workplace can be seen as the loss of connection between two people. So whether that's an important colleague or a manager direct report relationship, it's that loss of connection. Basically, we are social bonding creatures, and we need to have a connection with the other person in order to survive and thrive. We often in the workplace, people don't consider their work relationships to be emotional relationships. And, bringing the word emotion into the workplace or any conversation about the workplace, typically is being thought of as just like anathema. Relationships don't happen, or emotions don't happen in the workplace, of course. But our relationships with our manager and with our closest colleagues with whom we have to collaborate are emotional relationships. And when those go wrong, we go into stress and distress. So, more modern neuroscience research has highlighted the consequences of exclusion or loss of social connection, that really when we experience that in an important relationship, especially in a relationship where we're dependent on somebody, so our immediate boss or immediate colleagues, when we experience that kind of loss of social connection, or we feel excluded in some way, or there's a breakdown, that is like the brain reacts in the same way as if there was a physical punch. receive. Okay. The same areas of the brain are lighting up. It's the same kind of emotional reaction in the brain. So that leads to a lot of stress and distress. People go home and they have sleepless nights. They're talking about it to, whoever will listen. They're stressing and worrying about it. They're trying to figure out how, how can I figure this out? How can I make this better? And as a result, then when they're in the workplace, they're not fully engaged. And they're becoming more disengaged the longer it goes on, and they're not able to focus in the same way. So again, it brings in further costs for the organization. So the relationship is a critical driver of job satisfaction. We can give people free food and soft drinks and, all these perks, the foosball games and everything. But in the end of the day, if it's not helping the relationships, then that's the critical driver. So you can see here, drivers of life satisfaction. Job satisfaction is only about a quarter of that. Mental health is much bigger, and there are other factors that are bigger again. But when it comes to drivers of job satisfaction, interpersonal relationships are almost 40%. The interesting job piece is less important. And drivers of satisfaction in interpersonal relationships at work, management is 86%, and co-workers are only about 14%. And they're recent enough findings from McKinsey and Company. So, if you're a manager, or, if you're in HR, for example, and you're managing managers, the relationships there are really, really critical. And that's what's keeping people performing, and that's what's keeping people engaged in their job as well and staying. And so, as I mentioned, exclusion or isolation or that loss of connection can trigger a kind of a panic response. And so it triggers an emotional response in the amygdala in the brain, which is just a small little part, but it's, it connects in as one of the oldest, most primitive parts. And the amygdala, what's interesting about the amygdala is that it can override any other part of the brain, but other parts of the brain can't override it. So if you think of your prefrontal cortex, which is, where you might have the logic and the reasoning and all of that, your amygdala, when it's gone into arousal because of a stressful situation, because of a difficult relationship, for example, it can override all your logical and rational thinking. So when you're in that emotionally aroused state, logic isn't, it's gone out the door. There's only one of them in the driving seat, and the amygdala gets preference. Okay. The logical brain cannot override the emotions. So you have to find a way to calm the emotions down before your logical brain can get into the driving seat. That's the order that it happens in. So if you're dealing with an employee, for example, or somebody in your team, or a colleague, who is displaying stress or anxiety or overwhelm, if they're in an emotionally aroused state, they are not going to be able to talk logically and rationally to you, or make a logical, rational decision. And of course, that impacts then our work and our ability to think clearly, our ability to prioritize, our ability to see the wood from the trees. And so when we're in that kind of a situation, when we're in a disconnect, and when I use the word disconnect, I think probably conflict can often sound too strong for people, whereas a disconnect is just to show you how simple it happens. Disconnections happen all the time. If you think of your relationships at home with people that you love and that you're committed to, disconnects still happen, and you end up irritated and annoyed at them or triggered by them. And it can be as simple as like a look, a tone of voice, they're stressed and they say something, and to you in a certain tone that now has you all bothered, and why did they speak to you that way, and do they not care? And it's the very same in work. We're triggered, and disconnections are triggered so easily by tone of voice, by a look, or by a decision that's made, or by just a small behavior even. And it can be a simple misunderstanding or a simple miscommunication that triggers this disconnect, and that then has somebody going off. One person might be completely oblivious, and the other person is going off into their stress response. And so we've identified a negative cycle. And what's really useful about this negative cycle that we get caught up in, we see it as being in this space between two people. So therefore, it's not that any particular person is to blame. It's not that they're an awkward person or they're a challenging person. It's no, they're triggering something in me, and then my reaction chain is triggering something in them, and we're getting caught up in this negative cycle. And within that negative cycle, the two most common kind of positions that people take are the pursuer and the withdrawer. So the pursuer is the person who goes, we have to talk. There's something happening between us. We need to talk. Now, there are memes about women saying that to their husbands. We need to talk. Husband runs away, you know? So about 70% of pursuers tend to be women. We tend to be the ones who go, we need to talk about this. There's something going on here. You haven't been answering my emails. Why? And so we go into chase mode. And I think of it very like Pac-Man. You've got the pursuer, and then you've got the other person legging it, running away. They're the withdrawer. Okay. And the harder somebody pursues, the harder somebody withdraws. But of course, the pursuer senses that person withdrawing, so they pursue harder. And both of these positions can be understood to be with a positive intent. And the positive intent is, I need to save this relationship. So the pursuer is trying to save the relationship by forcing a conversation, by forcing a kind of like, we need to talk about this, we need to look at this, or, you know, you need to improve, or you need to do this kind of thing. That's going to make it all better. However, that pursuer behavior may come across as demanding or critical, or judgmental. Meanwhile, the withdrawer is in their efforts to save the relationship. I need to shut this down. I need to get away. This is going to blow up. I don't want to get into full scale conflict here. It's going to escalate. I can't listen to this. This is too stressful. I'm feeling really anxious. And so they're starting to shut down and pull back. And each influences the other unconsciously. Because as this person withdraws and pulls back, this person gives chase. The more this person gives chase, the more this person has to withdraw. So sometimes you'll get two pursuers and you do have the fireworks, big fight. And sometimes then after that, they both withdraw. And if two people are withdrawn, and actually I'm working with a couple of situations at the moment, and there's such a serious level of withdrawal, it's like, is there a relationship anymore? If both people stay withdrawn, how can there even be a relationship? Because there's just total stonewalling and no talking to each other. And it's like, how can we create a safe ground again to meet? So I'm hoping with that little description that you're beginning to recognize, you know, either the pursuer or the withdrawer in yourself. We usually have a kind of habitual pattern of response. Sometimes you might be a pursuer in one relationship and a withdrawer in another, or it might start off as you kind of go into pursuer, and then it's like, well, I give up, and you just withdraw if you're not getting it. But both of they're the two key responses, really. And usually you'll get a pursuer and a withdrawer. And it triggers a negative cycle of interaction. And that goes around in a loop, and it just perpetuates the conflict. And of course, we also know that in the workplace then, as that continues to happen, other people get sucked into that. You might get somebody who kind of gets sucked into being the rescuer, or the person who kind of tries to calm things down, or you know, toxicity starts to build because a little corner over here is talking about that person over there, and you know, soon everybody's involved, and one person is maybe scapegoated or identified as the problem. Okay, so this approach does not identify anybody as the problem. It's about identifying the negative pattern that's going on in the relationship. And if we can rebuild the relationship and give people those skills, then actually you can break out of the negative cycle altogether and break into a positive cycle. So, sorry, Bridget, could I just ask you to mute yourself just so there's not background noise? Thank you. If there's any questions, feel free to unmute. Yeah, so when our brain goes into panic, and we go into that kind of separation distress, the results can be either kind of complaining, blaming, demanding, criticizing, and judging, and you are seeing that in the office. Or on the other hand, what you're also seeing is the withdrawal behavior of disengagement, distancing, stonewalling, and avoidance. And so there's kind of that shutting down and increased anxiety. And all of this is based on neuroscience and attachment behavior, our understanding of attachment theory. So yeah, we end up kind of going around in a vicious circle and feeling exhausted and stuck. And people feel alone and isolated in that as well. And that disconnection just gets deeper into a rut. Okay. So EMC, which I kind of briefly mentioned, just to give you a little bit more about it, it stands for emotional connection, with the recognition that actually the work bonds that we form are emotional bonds. We are social creatures and we need we need to feel safe, and even those feelings of safety are emotional feelings. And so the EMC strategy is centered around a systematic exploration of emotions present during those moments of stress and uncertainty and volatility. It's a very safe process. It's very contained and structured. But the whole aim really is that when understood and addressed, participants can work to create emotional safety in the workplace. We know there's so much research behind psychological safety and the need for that in order for people to be able to be themselves and bring their authentic self to work and to work from their best place and work to their potential. And of course, build engagement and build satisfaction, as well as the focus of well-being at work. It's huge. None of that exists when there's a lack of safety. And if there is a disconnection in a relationship, there is a lack of safety at that point, and it's so important to recreate that safety and reestablish that safety. What happens a lot, well, first of all, I suppose, although there's fantastic mediators out there, very often a mediator is only brought in when it's gone to HR and employment law kind of stage, and it's like, we're on the way out here, and so it's far too late usually. Really, ideally, this approach, I suppose there's kind of two pieces to it. One is the reactive piece, where there is a breakdown in a relationship. I might be brought in to bring them through the reconnection process to help that relationship to be repaired and to rebond. And again, that's a very safe and structured process. And then the second part is the more proactive piece, where it's about training people in these skills so that there will be future disconnects because we're human beings, but that those disconnections are repaired early and quickly because people have those skills and they recognize when they're getting caught into the negative cycle, rather than that cycle getting so deep that somebody's on their way out or you're into employment law issues. Okay, so this is an approach developed and researched by US psychologist Dr. Lola Gershfeld and her team. She has done about 15 years of research on it. She has books written on it. There's case studies on it. She's worked with over 1,000 people, brought them through the reconnection process at this stage in companies and teams. She's huge experience. So, just to kind of run through in a picture graph, I suppose it's really a roadmap to building emotional intelligence competencies in leaders, always starting with self-awareness, so that you're helping people to recognize emotions within themselves and understand their own triggers and automatic responses. So the triggers and automatic responses are part of what we identify as when we're breaking down and identifying what's happening in that negative cycle for people. What are your triggers? What caused this situation? What triggered it in the beginning? Was it a look? Was it something that was said? how do you respond? What are your raw spots then when that's happened? So you're building an awareness of self, and you're doing that they're also building an awareness of the other person and learning how to listen and hear safely, and then identify their own needs within that. And not, I need you to do that for me, but more, I just need to be heard. I need to be acknowledged. Um, and so it really helps build that relationship, because when we are safe enough to be vulnerable with each other, that creates a bonding moment. And so you're actually concreting the relationship at a deeper level. So that leader can then create a safe space for others. Now, this is not about having like a therapeutic type of environment in the workplace. It's not about kind of like, oh, I'm feeling this way, and airy fairy kind of emotions up here. Actually, just to show you, this is the workbook that I use, like when I'm bringing people through a reconnection. It's a very structured process, and that adds to the safety, because people are actually picking, okay, these are the surface emotions I've identified, right? And then we move down into what's happening under the surface. And actually that creates a huge amount of safety and structure. So that eventually, when people are trained up, that they can lead bonding conversations, so that somebody like me is taken out of the organization, and the skills are there. So it's changing the culture over time to create a healthy culture, whether that's even just within a team. And often that's how it starts within an organization. It'll be maybe one team who work on this, and then over time, other teams see there's something different about them. I want some of that, and it begins to spread through the organization. So in a nutshell, it's about mastering the art of relationships, so that you spend less time dealing with the people issues, and more time focusing on the real work. So, to break it down, I suppose at a very low risk level, there are reconnection sessions that you can take part in where there's a disconnect to help rebuild the relationship. Or there's an introductory workshop, for example, for the organization or for your team. And then if there's a commitment for at a further phase, then there's training available for all levels, online and or in person, and ongoing coaching for leaders as well, so that they learn these skills over time. So those skills, those people skills, really are installed in the leader. That doesn't happen overnight. It does take time to grow and develop that emotional attunement, really. But there are quite specific skills that we're working with here. So your benefits of this kind of approach and of focusing on the relationship and on the connection and safety in a relationship, rather than, I suppose, just focusing on performance. If we look at a current kind of structures within the organization, a manager will, usually have their reports in how many times a year, depending, it might be every 6 months, it might be less frequent, or it might be very frequent in your organization, where you have somebody in and you're raising any kind of performance issues and trying to let them know what they do well. You would have a lot less pips to deal with if the relationship was focused on first and foremost. So when there is safety, when there's the connection that's there, then that will lower the issues that you have to deal with, around performance. Actually, I've done an awful lot of parenting work over the years as well, and it's very similar. When you have a good connection with your child or your teenager, when you prioritize the relationship, you have a lot less work to do on the discipline side. So it actually works the same in the office. When you prioritize the relationship and the safety and being able to deal with the disagreements, being able to identify when somebody is walking out of your door in a workplace and they walked in, or feeling disconnected. It's like, deal with that disconnection, repair that, and then deal with anything else that's arising. Because if there's a disconnection, that's they're going out in distress, and that'll grow other issues. That's going to impact their work straight away. So some of the benefits of taking an approach that's focusing more on the emotional connection that happens in an organizational relationship are about having the skills then to resolve conflict and increase productivity, really getting to a place where you're identifying it and nipping it in the bud before it gets to what we might call conflict. Creating a psychologically safe environment that increases team effectiveness. It gives people a common language, so that actually it takes, in a funny way, it takes a lot of the emotion out of the equation, because there's like a common understanding there, and now it's not getting in the way. When it's not acknowledged and there isn't a language around it, as currently there isn't in most workplaces, it is getting in the way all the time, and people don't know what to call it. This offers a way of addressing the anger, the stonewalling, the passive-aggressive behavior and lack of trust that can happen, repairing relationships, increasing that emotional connection, and building agile teams, because it's like really strengthening the foundation in a team, that then when the market throws, war and COVID and everything else at us, and all that volatility and uncertainty, they have better flexible strength. They're better able to adapt because they have that relational strength together. They're more resilient as a team. And of course, if you're interested, in developing an atmosphere that supports coaching and collaboration, then this would absolutely add to that. So, in the end of the day, healthy employee relationships are what create profitable, productive companies. So I suppose I really want to emphasize today, it's the relationships. You all have a lot of skills, but it's, I'm sure you've worked on listening skills, for example, tuning in to the emotion of what's happening, rather than focusing first on, work performance. Because if we look at, okay, there's something going on here, there's some disconnect. How can we help this person to reconnect so that then their performance comes up and their productivity? I see it all the time. When you actually really listen to that person who's not performing well, there's a breakdown in some relationship. They don't feel able to ask the question, or they felt dismissed in some way, or if there's some snub, or there's some interpretation or misinterpretation. It could be that they went into their manager, and their manager had just come off a difficult call and still had that tone of voice on them, or that kind of brusqueness because they're busy. It's something that actually had nothing to do with that employee, but that employee has gone out feeling disconnected from their manager. And then that changes how that employee speaks to their manager the next time, the tone of voice that they use, which now triggers the manager, and it goes around in that cycle. Or the way that they make a demand maybe of their manager next time, or whatever it might be. So if you would like to learn more about EMC, I am the main person in Ireland, UK and Europe. But you can go to the parent website, emcleaders.com, has a huge amount of resources. This is one of Dr. Lola's books, Emotional Connection. It's not too fat, as you can see. It's somebody from one of my recent webinars like, oh, I read that over the weekend. I'm like, well done. So I have a selection of webinars. A lot of my webinars, more recent ones, have been recorded and they're on my YouTube channel. Some of them go through different tools, like each webinar is different. So some of them go through different very practical tools from the emotional connection approach. If you think you'd like to know some more about those tools, just give a watch on, put it on high speed and for one of those videos. There are different tools used in different webinars. I go into the the negative cycle more in some of them. Um, so yeah, feel free if you have questions or you'd like to learn more about it to give me a shout. I'll have a conversation with you. No obligation, just information. Because this is so new as an approach, it is a science-backed approach, but it is completely new over here. So at the moment, I'm just trying to let people know there is another way. And having come from a background of 25 years now as a psychologist working with people in different capacities, both groups and one-to-ones. I've probably worked with thousands of people, and they're all coming to me with some difficulty or problem, and relationships is one of the key issues. And the other, I suppose, thread here is that we still often don't have those emotional skills in the workplace. There's huge research to show the importance of what are called often soft skills, the emotional intelligence skills, but I'm still not seeing people being promoted within the workplace for those skills. I think that will be that's going to take some time, but I think we'll have a happier, healthier workforces when that starts to happen.